Hey, this is Dan Lehman from automationhelpers.com, and today we're going to do a beginner's walkthrough of Airtable. When we first log in here, we see My First Workspace. Now, if you decide that you want to upgrade your plan later on, we have a pricing video dedicated to that, and I'll explain some of the scenarios where we have different upgraded workspaces. But for now, we're going to walk through this tutorial as if you're on a free plan, and later on you can choose to upgrade if those features and extra storage make sense for you. So when we're under My First Workspace, we've got the ability to add a base. A base is just a shortened form of the word database, and we'll get into how we have different types of records. But to get started, let's just click on the button to add a base. And now we see that we have the selection of choosing a template to be able to create this from. Now, I think it's important that when you're very first getting started with Airtable, that you start from scratch so that you can really understand your own use cases and how that translates into building it into Airtable. But this is very helpful later on. I do have a separate video on the top Airtable templates. So we'll X out of this. And we notice that this is kind of a little bland here as I'm looking at it. Mine appears gray by default. And so I want to click into my settings here. And we're going to use a use case here of a marketing campaign. And so we'll call this content creation is the purpose of our base. And I want to give this a little bit of life. So let's add some color to it and maybe add a logo that would make more sense from a marketing use case. That spices it up a little bit. I'm inside of my base. A base is going to be a collection of tables. And we can see by default, we automatically start with a table. But this table is just called Table 1. That's pretty boring. We want it to be more descriptive of how we're going to interact with this. As we talk about the architecture of bases, a table is just going to be a single type of records. If you are building a sales CRM, you might have your account records and you might have invoices, quotes, opportunities. Those would each be individual tables. If you're building this for project management, a table might be your projects and your tasks and your deliverables. In this case, since I'm operating from the standpoint of that we're doing this for creating content, I'm going to call my first table content. These are the individual pieces of content that I am creating. And I'll save that. So now we have our first table, and Airtable automatically starts us off with a few fields that we might be interested in having. I typically like to design my own. We can kind of start with these fields and see where we go from here. I think the first thing that we want to be able to do is have a title of the piece of content. I'll call this title, and we'll just have this be a single line of text. And I'm going to drag this over here. You might be wondering why we have name and title, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the next thing I want to be able to do is to create a field that signifies what kind of content that I'm working with. So this would be a good use case for a single select field. And so I can choose and find a single select. Now I'm going to add different options. So I might have an option for video being a content type, and I might have podcast, and I might have blog. So this is where we can have a drop down and have the user select which is relevant for this particular piece of content. We'll go ahead and give this a name of content type, and we will create the field. And I'll drag this over next to title as well. And now we can see if we click, we can drag down and we can select the appropriate option. We could say this is a piece of video content. Now from here, this name field is what we call our primary field. And the primary field is used in lots of different places throughout Airtable as the unique identifier for that record. Now here's why I'm not just using title, because it could be that we come up with an awesome piece of content, and then I want to repurpose that later on from a video to a blog post. And so it might be that the title that we select is actually being used twice, and then we don't want to call that the same thing in our primary field. Let's give an example of this. Maybe I would call this Airtable tutorial, just like we're doing now. Pretty bland name. But let's just copy that down. You can see if you're familiar with spreadsheets, you can just click and drag to copy into new record. And let's say that this one was a blog that we created. I'm going to go ahead and edit this field. And instead of being a single line of text, we're going to change this to be a formula. This is our very first formula field. And we are going to concatenate. And if you've used Google Sheets or Excel much, this will feel very familiar. But concatenate is just bringing two forms of text together. And so we're going to concatenate our title field. And we're going to put up a space and a pipe and a space. And then we're also going to concatenate that with our content type. You'll notice that we have these braces, these curly braces here. And the reason that we have this on content type instead of titles, because content type is two words, there's a space between it. And so just to identify that as that field type, it needs those curly braces. So let's go ahead and save this. And you'll notice that automatically that's going to take that title and it's going to concatenate that, put that pipe in the middle, and have our content type. So this is starting to look good. We've got lots of use cases where you can create lots of unique primary fields. If we had a table for contacts, we might want it to be our first name and our last name. All right, so let's keep going here. I don't really care about notes, but I do want to be able to have some kind of an idea of tasks for this. So let me edit this field, and I'm just going to change the title of this to tasks. Now we have a separate video on how to use Airtable for project management. And if you're interested in creating tasks and subtasks and dependencies and things like that, we'll get more into the details. I'm just going to use a really simple version of this where we have some rich text here with some checkboxes, because that's all I really care as I'm doing my videos. I'm going to enable rich text formatting, which is going to give me the option to have some checkboxes. I'll save this, and I'll click into my field here, and this is where you'll notice this little paragraph icon. I can click on that, and this gives me additional formatting options. I'll go ahead and click on this to create my tasks, and I would say I need to write a script, and then I need to create a thumbnail, and finally, I will record the video content. And those would be some tasks that I'd be able to see when we actually open up that record, and I could check these off to be able to signify that they are complete. Now, at this point, I might just be working on this by myself. I don't care about the assignee field, so maybe I'll just hide it for now. Maybe I need it later. I can hide that field, and then you'll notice that this appears here that we have a hidden field. We can check off if we want to hide or unhide fields depending on what is relevant for us at that particular time. Now, we also have a status field. This is one of those fields that's out of the box as a dropdown to do in progress and done. I kind of like that. We'll be able to signify where we are for a particular piece of content, so I'll leave those for now. I also want to create a date field for the date that we plan to publish this content on. So let me search for a date field, and we'll call this published date. And I don't really care about the time, so we'll leave that, and we'll create the field for published date. Let's go ahead and add. We can double click, we can use our date picker, put in a couple of due dates for these pieces of content. Now at this point, I might be thinking, okay, well, if I have all of these pieces of content that I'm planning, I want to be able to know how many days is that away to help me prioritize what I should be working on. So let's create another formula field that can help us determine that. Let's search for formula, and we'll call this days remaining. And I want to use, let me start by typing date, and we see all of these different methods that we can use around dates. I'm going to use datetime diff, which is going to let me calculate the amount of time between two different dates. And you can see the example of the formula. So this helps clue you in. You don't have to memorize all of these formulas on your own. And I'm going to put in the publish date. So I can start typing for that field, publish date, select it. And then I'm going to be able to put in, this is kind of neat, I can put in today, and this will always be today's date. I don't have to input manually today's date inside of a field. I can say it's today, and then I want this to be measured in days. Got to close out my parentheses there, create the field, and now you'll see that it automatically tells me how many days are remaining until that content is due. Let's go back and talk about these tasks again for a moment. When I open up that video record, we can see here are my tasks when we're creating a video. That makes sense. Now, if I was creating a blog post, recording a video wouldn't make sense for that blog post. I only want these steps when we're creating a content type of video. So I'm going to copy these, and we're going to create our very first automation, being able to use the system in the background to create and update records to make our lives a whole lot easier. So rather than me having to manually click and say, these are the tasks that I need to do, let's have the system do it for us. I'll click over on my Automations tab. And from here, I need to add a trigger. And this time I'll say when the record matches conditions is the trigger. So when the record equals this value, then we want to go ahead and do this thing. When the record matches conditions, and I need to select my table. We only have that one table right now, my content table. And we'll add a condition to say when the content type is video, then we want to, let's go ahead and choose our record. We already have that record present. This should work for us. And now we want to add an action that we're going to update that same exact record. You'll notice that Airtable has lots of different actions that we can take. Some come with the free plan, and some are part of the upgraded plans. There's a lot we can do even within the free plan. This particular action will be to update our record. And we will select our table. Again, it's content. And now we need to figure out the record ID. Well, we can do lots of complex things within Airtable to update different records in the system, but this is pretty easy because we want to update the same exact record that was part of that trigger initially. I can go ahead and click on this plus button, and this allows me to insert values from the initial record that triggered this. In this case, I'm going to choose Airtable Record ID, and this will tell it this is the record that we want to actually go ahead and update. And now we need to say which fields we want to update, and we're going to keep this really simple. All we want to update is our tasks field. And inside of tasks, I'm going to go ahead and paste what I had there before. Now, unfortunately, it strips that rich text formatting, but we can still utilize rich text within this. To do it, I'm just going to manually type in these brackets, bracket, space, and close the bracket. And then I'm going to create a new line and do the same thing. And one more time. All right, so now I have my 3 tasks again here. And let's generate a preview to see what this would look like. And we'd be able to have our tasks here. We don't really care about these computed fields. That's nothing we need to worry about right now. Let's go ahead and give this a name. And we'll say create video tasks. Now, of course, you could do the same thing to say, here are my tasks if it matches type of blog or type of podcast. But we're just going to manage this one use case right now. We'll want to enable this, turn our automation on, and let's head back to our data here. And let's put in a new value. We'll say project management for Airtable. And we'll give this a type of video. So our automation should run here. And you'll notice it did. It gives us this icon. It highlights it for us. We open it up. We can see those tasks have been created. And our activity history on the side tells us that that automation updated that record for us. This is the power of automations. There's lots of different reasons we can use automations. I love sending notifications to people. We can use it with different integrations as well. And we have a lot of other videos on those integrations and other types of automations we can do. But it's good just to start with something really basic like this. Now, the next thing I want to do is to be able to create a new table, because we don't think of our content just purely in terms of individual pieces of content. We think about a broader campaign that these pieces of content are connected to. Let's go ahead and create a new table here. Now, when we press the plus button, we can create an empty table, which is what we're going to do. This is what we did before, but we could also pull in information. We could take a spreadsheet with a CSV file. We also have the option to sync data from other locations. It could be another base. Just bear in mind as you're creating new tables that you have different data sources for how to create that table, but we'll start with an empty table and we will call this campaigns. And just a reminder, as we talked about before, that each table has a specific purpose. We don't want to copy and paste content between these. So I'm not copying anything from content to campaigns. Instead, we'll relate them, which is this idea that we get with relational databases, that we have different types of records that connect to one another. We have campaigns here, and we might call this something like Airtable product release campaign. And maybe we have an Airtable for enterprise campaign. Those might be different campaigns that drive different kinds of content that we want to be able to create. I'm going to delete some of these fields that I don't need. I'm going to hide this assignee one again. And we can have a status like we did last time. But the important piece here is that we want to be able to create a relationship between campaigns and content. I'll create a new field, and this is where we're going to search for a link to another record. And this link will be to our content. Now, do I want to allow linking to multiple records? In this case, I do, from the campaign to the content, because we could have 17 different pieces of content associated with this particular campaign. I will call this content, and we'll create that field. And at this point, I'm not going to add any lookup fields, but we will in a moment. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. I'm going to click off of that. You'll notice that nothing special happens right off the bat. But if I click over on my content here, I can see that there's a hidden field of campaigns, and I could show the opposite side of this. So when we create a link to another table, it's really a link between these two tables, and I can show this, and I've got campaigns. Now, if I go ahead and edit my field here, this is where I would want to say, no, I don't want to link to multiple records, because we want a content to be only related to a single campaign. And so this is what we would call a many-to-one relationship. We have many pieces of content related to one campaign. I will turn that off here, and we can confirm this change just basically saying, hey, you don't want to mess up all your data. Well, we're just creating this from scratch, so this won't be any issue for us. This doesn't really seem like it does anything magical at this point, but linking tables is something that you will be doing all the time as you work with Airtable. As I have an Airtable tutorial, let's link this to our Airtable product release. Let's say it's part of that campaign that we have. Now I'm going to stop here for a moment. I'm going to add some extra data in here so that we've got a little bit more to work with when we follow the next steps. We're back. We've now fleshed out some of the data to make it look a little bit more visually appealing here. And we've been able to connect a lot more of these videos to this campaign that we're interested in. Now, a campaign, if it was just the campaign name itself, this would probably be a good opportunity just to have a single select or a multi-select. But we want to start associating some revenue values with this. Let's say in campaign, we have a field that's a currency type for a budget, because we know that content takes money to be able to produce. Let's say we have a budget for this particular campaign. We can have precision here. I just care about big dollar values. Let's create this. So we might say that we have a budget of $5,000 for that particular campaign. And we want to be able to see, well, how much revenue does that generate for us? If we go back to our content tab, let's go ahead and create a new, maybe instead of revenue, we call it sponsorships, because maybe that's our primary way of adding revenue. And we'll look for currency again here, and we'll do the same kind of thing. Here's our currency and precision. We'll create that field. And we know that not all of these are going to have sponsorships associated with them, but let's just pretend that some of them do, and let's add some values. This got us $200 and $600 and $1,000 and $3,000. And of course, I'm just using silly numbers here, but I want to show how we can actually roll up this data to see how we're performing against the budget for it. Right now, these individual records have this sponsorship money associated with it. We can see all of our fields when we open up that record. Now we want to go ahead and roll up this information to that parent record. Let's head back to our campaigns and we'll create a new field, which will be a rollup. And we'll call this generated revenue from our sponsorships. And we're telling it that we want it to come from the content table. And now we need to choose the field that we're rolling up, and this is sponsorships. And we could filter only on certain types of records and things like that, but this will work for us. And to aggregate it, in this case, we want to be able to sum the values. In other cases, you might do something like averaging or finding the minimum or maximum. But when we're talking about this revenue, we want to be able to see that all up amount. So we will sum it. Let's go ahead and create that field. And then because we don't have other campaigns are tagged for content with these campaigns, that's going to be 0. But you'll notice that that automatically totals up our sponsorships, that all of these values totaled up equals that $4,800. And we're doing okay. We haven't yet hit our budget, so the content's not paying for itself, but that's where we can start to see some of those comparisons there. We've been able to do a lot in a short amount of time. We've created formulas, we've created automations, we've done roll-ups. I hope this has been helpful for you to be able to see how we get started with Airtable. One last thing I just want to show is that we've been operating largely from this grid-based view, and we have lots of other options on how we might want to present that content. So for example, I might want to have a calendar. Now this would make a lot of sense. Let me create this calendar view, and we're going to use our published date for it. And so automatically this populates this into a really nice calendar where we can take a look at the different content that we're creating, and we can shift between months. Maybe we want to go by weeks or every 2 weeks to see what content is on the horizon here. If we click into those records again, we'll be able to actually expand that record if we want to see the full record. But I like this when I'm creating content because this is how I think is in time base. How quickly do I need to publish this kind of content? Now, we do have additional abilities, especially if you upgrade. Again, remember from the beginning of this video, I'm doing this all on a free account. But if we were to upgrade our plan, we'd be able to color the different records. Maybe we'd want to have it appear a different color based on its publishing status or based on the campaign, the type of video that we're doing. Lots of different options there as well. Maybe we want to use a Kanban. Let me create a new view. And we want to do this by the status. So in this case, we're concerned about when it's actually being published. And now we can see here's our backlog. When is recording complete? When is it published? And we can shift records between these as well. We can just click and drag and drop. We can take something that's in the backlog and we can move it to recording complete. We can move it to published. And I should say that works the same for a calendar. Maybe I didn't quite get this video out in time. I need to move it by a date. And so we can shift it. And this is where Airtable becomes even more powerful because instead of just focusing on our grid views that we have, now we can start to turn it into a real application that we can interact with it. I hope this tutorial of Airtable has been helpful for you. I know we tried to cover a lot of information in a short amount of time, but that's why we have a whole bunch of other videos for you to take a look at if you want to dive in deeper into any of these particular topics. Another thing I want to offer up is that Automation Helpers helps organizations like yours be able to set up, configure, implement Airtable. We do things like integrate other business systems that you're using. So if you ever find yourself stuck and you want to have a partner come in and work alongside you or work with you to implement Airtable, we're just a phone call or email away. Head on over to our website at automationhelpers.com. If you have any comments, let us know down below.